Well, good afternoon everyone, I hope you're all well. Unfortunately it's going to be another week without any fishing involved because of one of these named storms has turned up again. So as most of you are aware, I normally set my fishing sessions for a Friday during the day or Friday night into the Saturday morning. Unfortunately this week everything was sort of in place up until about Tuesday, Wednesday, when we got sort of notice of this storm Benjamin turning up, and that came Wednesday evening, and that basically frothed the sea up, as you can see in some of these pictures, made the North Norfolk coast almost unfishable. In fact, it would have been unfishable in those conditions. That was on Wednesday night. It had calmed down quite considerably Thursday, especially on the eastern side of the Norfolk coast, from Lowestoft southwards. There was still sort of plenty of options down that way. Unfortunately, I couldn't then match up a tide and a decent venue for the Wednesday, so I pinned my hopes being able to go on the Friday. Well, Thursday night again, the remnants or the tail end of that storm affected the sea, and then we had another big rough up, and this is how it's looking this morning. So this is Saturday now. Unfishable, and that will probably be like that for most of tomorrow as well, and probably calm down for Monday morning. So there's not really much I can do on the fishing front. So the plan is I'm going to go through a few subscribers' questions with you today and answer a few little queries. It's just little things about like various things I do with my rigs, and I sort of mention it during some of the videos, and people often message me in the comments or with a DM. So I'm just going to go through a few little points that people have brought up. It was 2 or 3 different messages, and I've sort of managed to incorporate it into one sort of area, and you'll see as we go along what I mean. Okay, so the first thing that someone asked me was, during watching the videos, they noticed that my attachment from my rig to my leader seems to be exactly opposite to what most people do. And I think what he means is by this. I'll quickly zoom in and show you on a white background, it'll be easier for you to see. So what he was actually asking is, on the majority of people he knows and he fishes with, and him himself, they always seem to have the clip arrangement with the clip on the end of the leader, which is probably what most people do. And the swivel would be on the end of the rig. But what he's noticed is on all of my videos is I tend to have it the other way around. So I have the swivel on the end of the leader, and I have a quick clip, genie clip, whatever. There's several different ones now, I'll go into those a little bit later. But that will be on the top of my rig. And there is a very easy reason why I do it this way. Now, I don't often hear of it. It's probably an old thing from way back when, but when I first moved to Norfolk in the early 1980s, we had the privilege of using a great tackle shop in Great Yarmouth, run by a guy called Dave Dockwra. And me being a young 20-something-year-old, we used to go in there on a Friday night to collect our bait. And very often Dave would show us these little rig tips and hints. And I can remember going in there one week, and several of us were complaining about we were losing lots of tackle on the North Beach or the South Beach, which is where we ended up most Fridays. And Dave took us to one side and he showed me this little tip, and I've been using that ever since. And it's quite easy, the explanation. So the majority of times we used to get snagged up on the North Beach and the South Beach, which back in those days would be packed on a Friday night or a Saturday night. There'd be a line of tilly lamps as far as you could see, so there was a lot of people there fishing, and a lot of people would lose a lot of tackle. So most of the time we would be losing tackle to what we call line snags, which is other people's tackle snapped off on the bottom, leaving main line and the leader maybe trailing. The next person catches it, breaks off, that adds to it, and it builds up into a massive great line snag or heft. So way back then there wasn't things like the genie clips around, but there were some cruder versions of that, And then Dave Dockra in the end made his own, what he called lightning clips to mimic this. So today we're lucky that we've got several modern alternatives to that clip now. You've got one from Trident Tackle, and I'll put a little diagram up on the screen of that. That, as you can see, has been moulded so the gap between the hook and the body is very small. So that will help to stop picking up these line snags. So I can just demonstrate this first of all with like a homemade version of a line snag, so you can see what I mean. Okay, so this is my little simulation of a line snag. That might be a big bundle of line or some line attached to weed swinging around in front of you. You've lost 2 sets of gear on the trot. Now, if you're using your leader with the clip pointing up towards you instead of away towards the sea, this is what I think is happening on the majority of these line snags. So for instance, we say that you've cast your lead out and you're bringing it back, and your line somehow or another comes through some of these line snags. It might only pick up 2 or 3 strands that are wafting around in the tide or something. So that's the line snag. I can just undo it from the end, and your line is now completely through there. You can see the clip coming in there now, and you can see what's going to happen, I hope. So as you go in there and you're reeling back, your line clip goes in there like that, and because the clip's facing down like a hook, it's going to pick up several strands of that, and there you're in that line snag. There is 4 strands there caught in that hook, and that was just a brief demonstration. So if this is solid on the beach on the bottom, you're now hooked to that via your clip on the top of the rig. You're not going to get out of that. You might be lucky if it breaks, but if there's 4 or 5 strands of 15-pound line round there, it's going to take some force to break that. 9 times out of 10, it'll break your leader at the joint from your leader to your main line, and then you've just added your rig and your leader to that line snag. So what he explained to us was with his lightning clips. So let's just add the scenario now of the clip round the other way. So the hook part is now pointing down towards your rig, not up towards your rod top. So if we do the same demonstration here now, you're reeling in, it comes through this line snag. Sort of feed it through there a bit. Okay, so it's gone right through the centre of all that, which is laying on the bottom again, anchored to the beach. This time, if you're reeling in, that's not going to get caught there. 9 times out of 10, that will pull straight through, out the other side. Now I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, what about the hook and the lead? That's all still got to come through there. Yes, it has, you're right. So there's a couple of things we had to do as regards to the other end of the tackle as well, and I'll go into that now. So using the same principle, if your lead is attached to that clip with the hook pointing upwards, it's going to do exactly the same. Now if you're using a plain lead in that clip and you bring it through a heft, it'll be that clip then that then snags up and catches line as it would the other way round. So that's the next part we went on to, the lead attachment at the bottom. Now way back then, before we had sort of the option of all the various different things now, the lead would normally be attached to a small clip like that. So there's no actual hook on it. They were a little bit harder to get the leads on, but there's a lot less to catch. And again, demonstrating it going through here, that will more likely pull through than catch. If you've got that on the end, attaching your lead, with the extra bit of lead weight pulling it down into that, that'll snag up there as well. So we went over to using these little split rings, metal rings on the bottom, and that alleviated that problem a bit more. Now you're still, if you're using grip leads, you've still got the chance of the grip leads catching in all this rubbish, but again, with a bit of steady pressure, with the grip leads broken out of the sand and they're pointing backwards, you could normally work it and managed to pull it through. The wires would bend, and if you were lucky it pinged off. Very occasionally it would still get caught, but this definitely reduced the number of times you've got hooked up. So we're quite lucky these days that manufacturers are obviously developing Termalinks and things like that. So Trident brought out a Termalink, and then with the smaller gap between the hook and the part where the rig was attached or the leader was attached, there was much less chance of that snagging in the bottom. So that helped with that. Now if you're using one of the lead release clips like an imp for instance, again it does pose a few problems when there's a lot of these line snags around. So with the imp, it still has that angled piece of metal where that is potentially going to get caught. Now you've got no option really. Gemini splashdowns are a little bit more streamlined. There's not so much to get caught on them, so if you're using that type of thing. So to get around this problem of the imp or your Gemini or whatever you've got at the bottom picking up the line, I'd often use the impact leads from Breakaway, whereby you've got the spike which you can attach your hook link to for the cast. That's pointing down away from the snags again, so technically that's not going to get caught on too much line. So the way I would attach the Breakaway impact lead to the bottom of my rig would be using one of these limitless clips, and as you can see on there, the clips are torpedo shaped if you like, which are streamlined, and the part where you click the lead in or out is actually pointing inwards, so it's much less liable to snag. And I've had them pull through everything with plain leads. I've got them on most of my rigs now, unless I'm having to use something like an imp or a Gemini splashdown. Now it is worth mentioning, if you are going to use a swivel on the end of your leader to attach your rig to, these swivels have got to be up to the job. It's no good buying cheap swivels with wire on that's not up to the job, that they can part basically, or too much stress. So it's always worth investing in decent swivels for that attachment between your leader and your rig. You should use good swivels all the time really these days. There's no real excuses. That if you buy cheap swivels from Japan or whatever in bulk loads, some of them are really not going to be up to the job, and they could part on a cast for instance and send your rig or your lead parallel to the beach, which is not a good idea. But what I tend to use is, and these I found when I was using pike fishing stuff, so you can get these little power swivels now. This one's black, you can also get them in silver, but these are power swivels, and that one there is rated up to 180 pounds breaking strain, so it's plenty big enough, strong enough, and it's also small enough to go to the tip rings of all my rods. That's one thing you've got to take into consideration. Some of the bigger swivels won't pass through the eye of your Conti rods particularly. Those ones will, the Breakaways, and so will these. These are just big enough to get through the top ring, but that's over double the breaking strain of that. And when I say breaking strain, that's what they've been tested to. After they've been in and out the sea for a few months, they're probably going to be slightly less, but that's why I go with these power swivels. They're just more reliable, and so when I was using them for pike fishing, and you're using 60 or 80 pound braid, you've got to have the swivel to match, and I've literally pulled out all sorts of debris out of lakes and rivers on the heavy braid using these swivels, so I know they're up to the job. But essentially that's no different to doing it the way you've always done it with your clip on the end of the leader. I've just reversed it round. Have a try, just see, even if you only change that top connection from your rig to your leader. It's still quick connection for if you're doing match fishing. Rig comes off, goes on the beach, change it onto a new rig straight away. You've still got all the benefits of that. I just find that I've picked up a lot less snags since I've been using that. Now, carrying on from that theme, this is only regarding sort of line snags and hefts and things like that. Once you start talking about rocks and rough ground, it's not going to make any difference, because I would say 99% of the time with rough ground, it's going to be your lead that digs you in and catches you into the snag. and so none of this is relevant to that. That's when you go over to using something like a rotten bottom system where you drop the lead. So I'd be very interested in any feedback if anyone else does it the same way as me, with everything pointing down and streamlined clips at the bottom. The only thing I didn't mention was obviously the other thing that can always come into the equation is your hook and your hook link. That'll be another thing that will pick up these line snags, and it's the reason why we tend to use slightly lighter hook links and maybe hooks with a bit of flex in them. So again, if you do get hooked up and it's the hook, everything else is coming free and you're just hooked up with your hook link and your hook, steady backward pressure should straighten out the hook enough for it to ping out of the snag. Away you go. Again, if it's rough ground and rocks, it's going to get caught in there. Potentially it'll snap the hook link off if it's the hook that's caught in the rough ground. If you've got the top of the rig caught in the rough ground, that'll break at the leader knot. And if the lead's stuck in there again, that'll probably break at the leader knot. Like I say, if anyone's got any input to that, please feel free to put it in the comment section. Be very interesting to hear other people's thoughts on that. I've definitely noticed that if it's just line snags, the way I've got it set up now with everything pointing down towards the lead, 9 times out of 10 it's only going to be the lead or the hook link that catches, but most of the time I seem to be able to manage to pull it back and get it back, even if I just straighten out a hook or even lose a hook. Okay, so moving on to the next question, and it is slightly linked to what we've just been talking about. It is, in the past I've mentioned about a blobbed leader, and several people have asked me what is a blobbed leader. So what I mean by the blob knot is, instead of having to tie a knot in the end of your leader and then feed your main line through that knot, several turns around the leader material and then a half blood knot, if you like, back towards the knot, that then all tightens down and pulls back and you're ending up with something like that. It's a standard leader knot, and you can find the instructions for that anywhere on the internet, how to tie that. It is a little bit bulky, but it's the easiest one you can do on the beach especially. So this is what I use as an alternative, and basically all it is I get my leader material. I'll just bring the camera back down now so onto this surface so you can see what I'm doing easier. So this is a spool of leader material, and that particular stuff is £70 I believe, this one. I've got £70 and £80 all made up, but I'm just going to do it because it's slightly thicker and easier to show you. And that's literally just cut off straight like that. Now the traditional way of tying a leader would be to put a knot in the end of that, feed your line through the knot, go round the leader material several times, tighten up and pull it back and cinch that knot right down. And that does give you a fairly good knot, but I still think it's slightly bigger in size than what I'm going to show you now. That is the knotted version of this, and now I'm going to show you how I do the blob knot. It's exactly what it says really. It is, you're blobbing the end of that. Carp anglers do it, all sorts of anglers do it. By making the end of the line thicker than what it is, it can't pass through a knot. So all you do is you get your leader material like that and get some sort of heat source, a lighter or something. I've got this because it's handy, I'm in the kitchen. Get the flame and then just touch the end of the leader like that, and you can see it just suddenly bubble up. And it forms a blob on the end of there. Now I'm not quite sure how this is going to focus, but hopefully you can see there's a blob on the end of that leader. So once you've got your knot like that, you want to attach your main line to it. Just move that over here like that. This is your main line coming in from your rod top, for instance. What you do is you lay it parallel with the blob knot like that, pinch those two in your fingers and form yourself a loop. Once you've got that loop like that, make it fairly big, don't mess about with any small loops, have plenty of material on that to work with. That loop's parallel with your leader material, then you bring that through there. I do 5 or 7 times, 5 to 7. 7's my lucky number, so I'll do 7. 7. Once you've got that through there, what I tend to do then is moisten that knot, as you should do with all knots, and then gradually holding the tag end there and the leader material, gradually pull that knot down. You'll see it start to actually form a knot like that. Once that's knot formed, what I then tend to do is get hold of the end of the mainline material and just tighten that down a little bit more. Ease that knot down towards the blob. Once it gets to the blob, again I'll get hold of that material of the main line and just tighten everything up. And then what you can do for a final tighten is just gradually put some pressure on, get that knot nice and tight. You can get something on there like a pair of grips or pliers or something if you really want to pull that down tight. I don't find the need to do that, and all I'm doing with that is taking that right off with a pair of nail scissors. Now you've got to agree that that is a much neater looking knot. It's very strong, and I also find the advantages of using that blob is weed doesn't get caught on there so much. So when you're pinging weed off, if you get a load of weed on the end of your rig, that's going over that easier than what it does with this traditionally tied knot. And if I can do them side by side there, you can probably see there is a slight difference in size. So also with the traditionally knotted leader joint, you can see there's a tiny little tag in there, so there's a lot more to get caught on different things, including your thumb if you're using a multiplier. That blob knot is so much smoother than that. It's a very strong knot. The idea is I would practice it several times on a couple of bits of nylon until you get the hang of it. Once you've mastered it, I think it's easier than that because you haven't got to tension both sides, and that is ultra strong. I'm putting all my force into that now. That's not going to come off. That is the blob knot. I'll put a link in the description, so there's a video there for someone doing it in a lot closer up and in slower motion for anyone who wants to learn how to do that. I thoroughly recommend that. I use it all the time now and I've not had no problems with it. So the final thing I'm going to cover in today's little tips video, is once you've got your leader blob knot sussed, this is how I can actually be up and running again within a minute of losing a rig to a snag or whatever, or crack off. It literally takes me 1 minute to get a rig out of the box. These are already prepared with a swivel on the end. So I tie the swivel on the end. I've got a jig in my shed with a 1 metre spacing. I hook that on one end and then I go up and down 7 times, give me 7 metres, which is the length of my rod which I need from the reel to the tip ring back down to the reel. That's plenty enough to have several turns around the reel and enough to put a rig on, and that will fit on all my rods, 7 metres. And then what I can do then is pull off the 7 metres, cut it off, put the blob on the end already, do it in the shed in a nice dry non-windy conditions, and then store them on these old spools. And as you can see, I've got some spool bands here which I got off of a lady on the internet. Absolutely ideal for this sort of thing. I use them on my reels and on all my storage, all my rig body storage in the garage, in the shed. Always has these, so you just can pull off the line to what you want. You've not got tons of line pouring around there. Very neat and tidy. And as you can see, what I can do then is set up my 7 metres with a swivel on and pre-blobbed, put it on these spools, and what I would do is I'd carry 2 or 3 of these in the box ready to go. So as soon as I crack off, I can literally get my main line, attach it to that, reel it off this spool, and you're away, you're fishing again. I've also got in the box, as an ultra emergency, I've got probably 100 metres there of 60-pound clear leader material. That's not got a blob on the end of it there. That's a little bit thinner than the 80-pound, so I can tie a knot with that in an emergency. I'll only use that in an emergency. I normally have 2 reels with a spare spool, so that's 4 leaders already tied. A couple more spares in the box, so that's 6. If I'm losing more than 6 lots of gear, then I'm probably going home. So I'll leave the link for the description for these spool bands again in the more info of the video, just in case anyone wants to follow that up. So I hope for the people who have asked those questions, that's answered them. If you've got any more questions, or you're not quite sure of anything, drop me a message again. I can always go through it with you with a direct message or something like that. Sorry if it's sort of bored the people who do know all about this sort of stuff, but a lot of the people who do watch the channel are either restarting back into sea fishing, and they've been away for a few years, and all the techniques and the equipment available and rig attachments are all changed since they last fished. This is basically for their benefit. So all being well, next week, if we don't get any more named storms crop up between now and then, I'll be back on the beach somewhere next Friday, and the following Tuesday that'll go up. In the meantime, I think I've got a club match on Monday. We're at Cly on the Norfolk coast, weather permitting. As I say, it was raging this morning, but in say 2 days' time that could be completely flattened out and calm, and you never know, this stir up might even produce a few more fish for us. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon on the next one.